The border is 0. The width is going to be 95%. The background is going to be transparent. The height is going to be 40 pixels. And the color is from the variables, and it's going to be white. So go back to the browser, and you can see that it works now, but we have this nasty little outline. You shouldn't remove the outlines, actually, but in this case, I think it's fair to do it because it doesn't look good. So I'm going to remove them. So inside input, I'm going to nest focus, and I'm going to remove the outline. I set it to none, and hopefully that will remove it. Yeah, you can see that it's removed now. One thing you can do also if you want is to style this for mobile devices, maybe make it a little bit less in font size and stuff like that, if you want to really fine-tune it here. But it seems to be working now. All right, and that's it for the search bar. That's the styles for the search bar. In the next video, we're actually going to hook this up to the API and fetch some data. We've created our search functionality and our search bar, but we can't really search for anything yet. So if we type something in, we just get this console log here. So we're going to implement the actual functionality where we fetch the search data from the API. So let's go back inside of the code editor, and we're going to be in the use home fetch hook. And down here where we say initial render, we're going to change this one to initial and search like this, because we're going to use this use effect both for the initial render and the search. And it's actually pretty easy, because now we just have this empty dependency array, meaning that we only trigger this use effect once on mount. But we also want to trigger this one each time the user search for something. And up here, we have our search term. And in this one, we're going to store what the user typed in the search bar. And that means that we want to trigger the use effect when the search term changes. So down here in the dependency array, we specify search term, meaning that this use effect will trigger each time the search term changes. And it will also trigger one time on mount. So we can actually use this one for the initial fetching also. Because when we search for something, we always want to fetch the first page, just as we do on the initial mount. So that's fine with fetching the page 1, but we also want to provide the search term. And that's also fine for the initial fetching, because the search term is going to be an empty string. So we know that we're fetching the most popular movies because we're not specifying any search term. There's one more thing though that we have to do, and that is to wipe out the old state before we make a new search. Because we want to wipe it out and then make a search, show the loading spinner, and then show the new movies that we grabbed from the search. So we can set state to the initial state here, and that will wipe out the state. And that's really all there is to it. So we save this file, go back to our application, we try to search for something, and you can see that it works. Now this one changes, because this one will always grab the first element in the array of movies. And that's fine actually, you can have it like this if you want, but I want to remove this hero image when we're in a search. So we can do that also. So go back to our code, and then inside of the home.js, down below here, where we show the hero image, we can also specify that we don't want to show this one if we have a search term. So not search term, $ampersand. So now we're checking that we don't have a search term, and also that we actually have a first element in the array of movies. But you can see that it warns here now, and that's because we haven't exported this one from our hook. So go back to the hook, and down below here, we can export this one also, search term, like this. Save the hook, go back to the home.js, and up here where we destructure out everything from the hook, we can also destructure out the search term, like this. Save the file, go back to our application, we try to search again, and now you can see that it disappears. This is exactly what I want. If you want to keep the hero image, you don't have to do this. And then it reappears when we don't have anything in the search bar. All right, there's one small thing that I also want to do, and that is in the home.js. And if we look down below here where we have the grid, I'm going to create a ternary operator now, because now it says popular movies even when we're in a search. So this one, I'm going to create a curly bracket and also a curly bracket here at the end. And then I check if I have a search term. I have a question mark. And if we have a search term, I create a string. I want it to say search result. And if we're not in a search, it's going to say popular movies. So if we have a search term, it's going to return what's to the right of the question mark, and that's search result. Otherwise, it's going to return popular movies. Save the file, go back to the application. This time I'm going to search for Indiana Jones. And now you can see that the header on the grid changes, so that's great. It says search results. And I remove this, and it says popular movies. So that's our search. We have implemented all the logic for the search bar. And in the next video, we're going to start creating the load more button. Okay, let's start creating our button that will go at the bottom here. And the spinner will not show all the time. It will only show when we're loading stuff. Back in the code and inside the components, create a new folder that's called button, capital B. And you guessed it, we create a new file that's called index.js. And we create another file that's called button.styles.js. And we're going to be in that file and import styled from style components. And for this one, we're only going to have one style component. So we export const, and it's going to be a wrapper equals a styled.button in this case. And double backticks, auto format it and save it. And then we go back to the index.js file, and we're going to create our button. So we import React from React. Then we have our styles. So we import the wrapper that we created, wrapper from /button.styles. All right. Then we have our component, const button. Then I just structure out two props. One is called text and one is called callback. And I create an arrow and I make an implicit return on this one. I'm going to have the wrapper. It's going to be type button. And it's going to have an on-click handler. And it's going to be the callback that we send in as a prop. And then I'm going to display the text inside of the button. So this is a button that we created as a style component and call it wrapper. And it's going to trigger a callback function when the user clicks on the button. And then we show the text. So we can send in what text we want to this button if we want to reuse it. Then we export default button, save it. Then we go back inside of the home component. And at the top, we're going to import button from /button. And then at the end of our JSX, we're going to show the button. And we have to think about this because we don't want to show the button if we reach the last page of movies. So we have to take that one into consideration. So just below the spinner here, I'm going to use a curly bracket and create a JavaScript expression. We're going to check from the state.page. If that one is less than state.total_pages, we know that we're still not on the last page. And I have a double ampersand and make a short circuit here. I'm also going to check so that we're not loading anything. So if not loading, and then I have another pair of ampersands. And I have a parenthesis. I put it on a new row just to make it a little bit more readable. And then I'm going to show my button. So the text is going to be load more. And for now, I'm not giving it the callback. So this is it for now. So this statement will check if the page we're currently on is less than the total pages. And then we know that we still want to show the load more button. And it will also check that we're not loading anything, because when we're loading something, we want to show the spinner instead. And we have the spinner here. We can actually create another statement here. So create a curly bracket and type in loading and double ampersand. And we end it with another curly bracket like this. So this will show the spinner if the loading is set to true. And if it's set to false, it will not display the spinner. But then it will display the button instead. If we go back to the application, we can see the button down below here in the corner, but it doesn't look right. We have to style it also to look like this here. And that's what we're going to do in the next video. We have our ugly little button here down at the corner, so it's time to style it. Go back to the code and inside the button.styles.js file, and we have the wrapper here. So we're going to give it some nice little style here. We start by displaying it as a block, display block. We set the background from our variables. We have the dark gray. We set the width to 25%. The min width is going to be 200 pixels. The height is going to be 60 pixels. The border dash radius is going to be 30 pixels. And the color is from the variables dash dash white. The border is going to be set to 0. The font size is going to be from the variables font big. Margin is going to be 20 pixels and auto. The transition is going to be all 0.3 seconds. I'm lazy here. I could set it just on that property that I want to have a transition, but I set it to all. Outline is going to be none. And the cursor is going to be pointer. Then I want a little hover effect also. So hover, I set the opacity to 0.8. That's why I had this transition here also. I just want to check also the font sizes here. Font big. Maybe we can use this one instead on the styles for the search bar, because I think I have, I have the font size of 28 pixels. We can use the variable instead. Variable font big and see how it looks. Yeah, I think that looks nice actually. We can use that one instead. But let's check out the button. Yeah, you can see that it works. It looks great now. We only have to create the logic for the button now so that we actually can load more movies. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. This is actually the last video for the homepage. So we're going to create the fetching logic for loading more movies. And we're going to start in the use home fetch hook that we have in our hooks folder. And we're going to start by creating a new state. So this is going to work in a way that we have a state with a kind of a flag that we set to true or false. And we set that one to true when we click on the button. And then we're going to trigger a use effect. Because as I said before, I think this is a great practice with the use effect hook and also the state hooks. So you could do this in other ways also. But this is a quite neat way of doing it. We have this state that we set to true or false. And when it changes, we trigger that use effect. And then we can trigger to load more movies. We first create a state, const is loading more, camel casing as always. And then we have the setter, set is loading more. It's going to equal, and we call the use state hook. We set it to false initially. And this one is going to be triggered from the button itself. So we have to export it down here also. So after the set search term, we can export set is loading more. So there you have it. I removed the sidebar so we can see the complete row here. Now we're exporting 6 of those. So that's our state. So we can go back to the home.js file. And here we have our button. But we first need to destructure out the set is loading more. Set is loading more. Do some auto formatting and it will clean it up for us a little bit. So we destructure out that one also, and that means that we can use it in this component. And one thing that we also didn't do is to actually check if we have an error. So we can do that before the return statement here. If error, we can return a div that says something went wrong. Like that. And that will make sure that if we get an error, we won't display everything here. We will display this error message instead. So you can create a more sophisticated stuff here if you want to do that. In our case, I think it's enough for this course. All right, so let's move on to this set is loading more. So we have our button down below here. And we already created a callback prop. So we give it the callback prop, curly brackets. And this one is going to have an inline arrow function, because I want to call this one with an argument. So set is loading more. Yeah, I'm going to remove the sidebar. Set is loading more, and we're going to set it to true, like this. So this will change this state when we click the button. And if we check out the application, we won't actually be able to see anything now. You can see that it re-renders when we click the button because it console logs this out. So we know that it's working. And one great thing to know that is that if I click a few more times here, you can see that it don't re-render anymore. And that is because we're giving it the same value. So React won't update the state if it gets the same value. So it's good to know that with React, if you give it the same state value, it won't re-render it. So React is kind of smart. It already knows that it has the same value, so it won't do anything. A quick little pro tip in React. All right. So we know that the button is working, so we move back to the use home fetch hook, and we're going to create another use effect down here below the search use effect. I'm going to mark it with load more. So just as before, I create another use effect, an inline arrow function, and we have the dependency array. And we want this to trigger when the isLoadMore is changing. So isLoading more, like this. And the thing is that we only want this use effect to trigger when we actually is loading more. So if not is loading more, if this one is false, we're just going to return. We don't want to do anything else in this use effect. This one should only do something when we load more movies. And what we want to do now is to call our fetch movies function again. And this time we want to give it the state.page +1 because we want to load the next page. And we also give it the search term if we're in a search. And now you can see that it warns us here because it wants a few other dependencies. It tells us that we need to specify the search term and the state.page. That's what we're going to do. The search term and the state.page. And now it will be happy at us. And that is because these ones are outside of the use effect. So we should always specify dependencies in the dependency array. And we should handle them inside of the use effect hook. If there's something we don't want to do when something changes, we should account for that inside of this use effect. So we're fetching movies, and then we set is loading more to false. Do some auto formatting and save it. And hopefully this should work. So we have the use effect that triggers when we change the is loading more boolean. If we're not loading more, we will just return. We don't do anything else in this effect. Otherwise, we call the fetch movies function and we give it the next page that we want to fetch. And we also give it the search term. And then we set is loading more to false again so that we go back to what it was before. And then we can do it all over again if we want to click the load more button again. Save it and go back to the browser and see if this works. We click the load more. And as you can see, it works. And I love when stuff just works. And you can see that our loading spinner is showing up also. It's fast, so we can't hardly see it, but it's there. So it's working. And we can also see in the console log here, we're at page 11 and we have 220 results now. So that's great. We know that load more is working. We can also try it out so that it works when we search for something. And it does. So that's sweet. I'm happy with this. Hope you like it too. You can see also that those images, some of them has some strange proportions. So if you want, you can tweak the CSS to take that into account also. In the next video, we're going to start creating our routes for the application. We're going to start creating the routing for our application. And before we do that, I just want to talk shortly about React Router and especially the version 6 that we're using. It's not officially released when I record this tutorial, so hopefully it's released now when you watch this tutorial, because it is, as they say here, it's around the corner. And I actually talked to this guy, Michael Jackson, here on Twitter, and he said that I should use this version in my course because it's that stable now and it's not going to change that much, and we're not going to use all the advanced functionality in the router itself. So that's why we installed the next version of React Router when we install the dependencies for this application. And there are a few changes in it if you compare it to version 5. And I actually don't want to talk about version 5 because that will soon be deprecated. So I just wanted to mention why I choose to use the version 6 of the React Router, because this is the future version and it has the API that is going to be used for a long time, hopefully in the future. So that's why I use it in this tutorial. I want to make sure that this tutorial uses the latest stuff so that you know that you're up to date on the things that you learn. So that's why. So just a few words here. You can compare, for example, they brag here with the React Router version 5 that the bundle size is 28.4 kilobytes minified, and the version 6 is only going to be 8.5 kilobytes minified. So if you care a lot about size on your packages, this one is drastically smaller than the version 5. And then they also show you some stuff here on how you use the router, but that's what I'm going to show you in the next video. But if you want to read more about this one here, you can go to react-training.com/blog/react-router-version6-pre/. And then you can read more about it, or just Google React Router version 6 and you will probably find a lot of information about it if you want to read more about it. So let's get started. We're going to create the routing in the next video. We have finished the homepage and we have our application here, and we have this nice little grid with all the movies, but we can't actually click on them to view a movie, and we can't click on the logo up here. So we have to fix that, and we're going to do that by creating some routes for our application. So the first thing we're going to do is, if we go back to the code, we're going to create 2 more components. So inside the components folder, we're going to create a new file that's called notfound.js, and also another file that's called movie.js. Capital M on movie and capital N and capital F on not found. So we're just going to scaffold these ones out so we have something to route to. If we're in the movie.js file, we import React from React. Then I create a component that I call movie, and it's going to be an arrow function, and I'm just going to return a div that says movie. And then I export default movie, do some auto formatting and save it. Always save your files. All right. Then I copy this one and I go inside of the not found file that we just created. I paste it in and I change this one. I'm going to change them in one go. Not found. Like this, and save it. And there you have it. We have 2 components to play with. And this one, the movie.js, is going to be the individual movie component for showing the movie. So we're going to be working a lot in this component later. This one is going to be as it is. I'm not going to create a fancy not found component. So you can do some stuff on your own in this one if you want to do that. So we scaffold out 2 components, and then we can move inside the app.js file that you find in the src folder, not in the components folder. So app.js. And the first thing we have to do is to actually import all the components we need from the router library from React Router. We can mark it here with routing if we want to do that. Then we import. We have curly brackets. We're going to import something that's called browser router, capital B, capital R. And this name is a little bit long, so if you want to rename this module, you can do that by typing as and router. So we import it as router. I think I'm going to remove this sidebar also. All right, so that's the first one. We import browser router, but we import it as router so we can use it with the name router instead. Then we import another component that's called routes, and then we import another component that's called route. Very similar names here, so be careful when you import these ones. And we import them from something that's called react-router. So be very careful here. We're not importing it from just react-router. We're importing it from react-router DOM. So this one is using React Router in the background, but this one is specifically created for using in the DOM. All right, so that's all the imports that we're going to do. So let's create our components down below here. And I'm actually going to change this one to an implicit return. So I delete the return and the curly bracket. And I want to create an arrow function instead. Const app equals. Because it's only with arrow functions you can do an implicit return. And I remove the curly bracket there. Do some auto formatting. To me, it looks a little bit cleaner. And this div is going to be replaced. This wrapper div that has a class name of app is going to be replaced with a router. So we wrap our complete application with the router. So it's really important where you want to put your routes, you should wrap it with the router. And that is the browser router that we imported here, but we renamed it to router. So that's why I use it as router here. Then the header is going to be shown on both the home page and the individual movie page. So the header is going to be left out of the routes. So I leave that one here. And then I use the routes component. And inside of the routes component, we can create our routes. And the first route, we're going to use the component that's called route. So we have 3 different components here from the router library. Router going to wrap or complete the application in this case. And then we have routes that's going to wrap our routes, because you can have routes in different components if you want to do that. So let's say that you have a component deep down in your app tree, and then you want to create some routes for just that component. You can wrap them in this routes component, and then you create your routes. So you don't need to have them here in the top of your application. And then you use the route component to actually create your route. And this route component has a prop that's called path. So we can specify the path where we want to show a specific component. And in this case, it's a / because it's the home page. And then we have another prop that's called element. It's going to equal. And here we can give it our component. And we want to give it the home component like this. And then we also have to self-close the route component. That means that we can remove this home component here. So that's the first route. If we want, we can save this to see that it still works. Go back to the application, reload it, and you can see that it works. So that's nice. Then we're going to create another route. So we use the route component again. We set the path, and this one is going to be /. And then we're going to do something special here, because when we're going to fetch an individual movie, we need the movie ID, and we can send along route params for that. And we create a route param for the route by specifying a colon, and then we name it. So movie ID. So this means when we create a link on the thumbnails that we're going to do soon, we can send along the ID for the movie, and that ID, we can grab that in our movie component and grab data from the API. And you can name this to whatever you want, because this is a route param that you decide what you want it to be named. So I want it to be named movie ID. And then we specify the element on this one, and we give it the movie component. And we also close the route component. We haven't actually imported the movie component, so we can do that. Import movie from ./components movie. And then we can also import not found from ./components and not found. There you have it. So that's the route for the individual movie. We save it. And we can't actually click on the thumbnails now because we haven't created that one. But what we can do is go up here, create a /, and then we type in some ID. And you can see that it types out movie here now. And that is because it's showing the movie component. So we know that it's working. So that's sweet. And then if we remove this one, we'll show the homepage instead. All right. We're going to create one last route, and that is for our not found component. So we create a route with a path of / and an asterisk. And this will make sure that we show the not found component on any other route that don't exist. And we set the element to the not found component. And we also self-close this route. Save it, go back to the application. We know that it works if we specify an ID like this. It shows the movie component. But what happens if we create another route here like this? Yeah, then it shows the not found. And that's super sweet, because then we have a fallback component if the user tries to go somewhere else in our application. So that's the route setup in our app.js file. Then if we move inside of our header component and the index.js file, we're going to create a link on the logo. Up here, we have to import curly brackets, and the component is called link from react-router-dom. And this is actually quite simple. It works the similar way as the A tag does in HTML. So we have our link component. We specify 2, and in this case, it's going to lead to the home page. So we have a /. And inside the link component, we just put our logo like this. So we wrap it inside of the link component, and this will make sure that we can link to the home page. So go back to the browser. For now, we specify an ID. So we're in the movie component, and then we click on this logo, and we go back to the home page. So really easy to make links with React Router. You can also make them programmatically, but we're not going to do that in this course because it's kind of a little bit more advanced and we don't really need it in this application. But we have to add a link to the thumbnail also so that we know that we can click on a thumbnail and that will lead to a specific movie. So inside the thumb component, the index.js file, we'll do the same thing up here. We import curly brackets link from react-router-dom. And we have this prop here that's called clickable because we are going to use this thumbnail for the movie poster on each individual page also. And that means that we won't be able to click that one. So we have to have this boolean to check if we should be able to click the thumbnail or not. And the way I solve this is to create a ternary operators. So here, just below the div, we check if clickable is true. It's enough to type in clickable. Then we have the question mark. And I have parentheses. And I'm going to use my link component, and it's going to link to. And in this case, we want to use the movie ID because, as I talked about before, we are going to send along this ID in the route, and we can grab it later in the movie ID param that we create here. So we have backticks. I create a template literal here. So I have /, then I have $, curly brackets, and I'm going to give it the movie ID. And this will give it a link with a / and the movie ID. Close the link component, and then we have our image. And in this case, I'm going to copy this one and paste it in. So this is if the thumbnail should be clickable. Then in the ternary operator, be very careful here. It should be after this parenthesis. I create a colon, and then I create a new pair of parentheses, and I move this image inside of that one. And I also have to end the ternary operator with a curly bracket, and then I do some auto formatting. So what did I do here? Well, I create a ternary operator checking if the clickable is true, and then I show the link component with the image wrapped inside it. And that means that we'll be able to click on this thumbnail. Otherwise, that's what's right of the colon here. I just show the image as it is. I don't wrap it in a link component, so the user won't be able to click it. Save the file, go back to the application, and hopefully we should be able to click our thumbnails. You can see that we have this nice little hand here. That means that we created a link. So if we click this one, you can also see that we have the movie ID up here. And that's the one that we're going to grab in the param in our movie component. So it's working great. And this is actually it for the routing. There's no more routing we need to do in this application. And in the next video, we're going to start creating the movie page. Okay, we're just going to do a little bit of scaffolding in our movie component before we move on. So up here, we're already importing React. We're going to import some stuff from the config also. So import, we're going to need the image _base _URL, capital letters, and the poster _size. And we're going to import it from /config. Then we're going to have our components. We're going to create new ones for this one. But two of them we already created. We're going to import the grid from /grid. Then we're also going to need the spinner. So import spinner from /spinner. And then we're going to create the other ones later. We're going to create a hook for this one. And we also need an image. And that's the fallback image, just as before. So import no image from /images and no _image.jpg. And as always, be very careful to actually add the extension here when it's an image. All right, and then we have our movie component. This one is actually not going to have an implicit return. We create curly brackets because we're going to have some logic in this one. So we create a return statement. parenthesis. And then I'm going to create a React fragment like this. And inside for now, we can just have a div that says movie, do some auto formatting and save it. And I think this should be it. Go back to the browser, try something out here, or we could actually just have clicked on one of these. Yeah, and it shows the movie, so that's great. We know that it works. And then we can move on, and we're going to start by fetching the data from the API so that we have something to work with. All right, we're going to create our second custom hook now. I'm not going to create it first in the movie component and then move it to a custom hook, because now we know how we can create a custom hook. So that's why I'm doing it instantly in that one instead. So in the hooks folder, let's create a new file that's called use movie fetch, capital M, capital F, and .js. And as I told you before, it's important to name your hooks with use before the name. This is the actual file name, so it doesn't matter here, but it's important that you name your actual hook with use before. So for this hook, we're going to import curly brackets. We're going to need use state and use effect from React. Just as before, we don't really need a main React library for this one because we're not doing any JSX and stuff like that. So that's why we're not importing it. We're going to import the API object from /API, and that will give us access to all these nice functions that I've created for us. Then we create the actual hook. So export const use movie fetch equals, and this one is actually going to have a parameter because it's going to be the movie ID. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So that's the arrow function. And up here, I create 3 states, the state and setter for that state. I call the use state hook. And I'm going to give it an empty object as default value. Then I create a loading state and set loading use state. I'm going to set this one to true initially because this component is going to start by fetching the data for the movie. So we can set that one to true. And then we're going to have the error and the set error just as before. And this one we set to false. So use state and give it an initial value of false. Right? So that's the state we're going to need for this one. And then we're just going to need one use effect for this one because we're only fetching data one time, and that is when the component mounts, and then we're not going to fetch anything more because then we have all the data from the movie that we need. So we have the inline arrow function, and we have the dependency array, and this one is going to change if the movie ID changes. It's actually not going to change now because we just do it initially, as I told you. But as I also told you, we need to specify all the dependencies for our use effect. So that's fine in this case to have it there. It's only going to fetch it one time. And then as a use effect can't have an async function here, we create another function that's async fetch data equals async. And in this case, I place it inside of the use effect, and I'm going to show you why in a second also. So we have an async arrow function. And then we can do our fetching logic inside of this one. And it's going to be quite similar to the other one that we did. So we have a try block. And we're going to catch the error if there is one. And if there is an error, we set error to true, like this. And in our try block, the first thing we do is to set loading to true. And we also set error to false. Just as we did before. And then we can fetch our data, but I have a typo here. It should say error. Yeah, I guess I misspelled it up here. Yeah. There you have it. All right. Yeah, this one too. Something like that. Right. So first we're going to grab the movie data from one resource from the endpoint. And then we also have to grab the credits that we get from another resource from the endpoint. So we have const movie equals. await, and from the API, I created a function that's called fetch movie without an S at the end. And we're going to give it the movie ID. All right, so that's the movie. Then we also want to fetch the credits. So we create a const that we name credits. We await again from the API dot fetch credits. And we also give it the movie ID. So hopefully we got all the data that we need here in those consts. But we want to do some stuff here, and that is we only want to show the directors only, because if we look at the finished application, and we go back and we click, whoa, yeah, there you have it, encountered 2 children with the same key. And this is what happens sometimes with this API, and I really don't know why. So if you get this warning, you can create your own unique key somehow by maybe have a random number and the movie ID. I don't know. You can do it in many different ways. But for now, it doesn't really matter. So we have the movie here. And as you can see here, we are showing the directors. So we need to get the directors somehow from the API. Because from the API and the credits, we get something back that's called crew. And the crew contains more than the directors. So we have to filter out the directors to just get the director's name. So I mark it with get directors only. And then I create a new const. I call it directors equals. And from the credits, that's the one up here, we have the crew property. And I'm going to filter this one. Filter is a built-in method in JavaScript. We have a member, a crew member. So I'm going to check if the member.job, this is also a property that we get back from the movie database API. I'm going to check if that one is equal to director with a capital D, and that will filter out all the directors and put them in this const. Auto format it. And then we have all the data that we need so that we can set our state. So we call set state. That's the setter for our state. In this case, we don't need to use a previous value. So I'm just returning an object here. I spread out the movie. That's the data that we got back here. So we spread out everything from that one. And then we have a property that's called actors. And I'm going to give it the credits.cast. So from the credits, we have the cast, and we also got the directors from the crew. So that the actors is a property that I create myself that I want to have in my state. And I'm going to have all the cast inside of the actors property. And the last one is going to be the directors. There can be more than one director, so that's why it's called directors with an S. And as this is ES6 syntax, we just need to type out this. It will create it like this automatically. All right. Then we're going to set loading to false like this. Auto format it, and this should be it for this use effect. Actually, I think for now, we need to return something from our hook also. I return an object with a state, loading, and the error. Save it, go back to the movie.js file, and we can see if it works. So down here, I marked it with hook. I'm going to import use movie fetch from /hooks and use movie fetch. And then we can try out our hook and see if we get some data back. So at the top of our component, we can destructure out the properties that we exported from the hook. I also want to show you how you can rename something when you destructure it. So we have the state that we destructure, then we have a colon, and I want to call it movie instead. So that's how you rename it. And then we destructure out the loading and the error. And we call our use movie fetch hook. And we also want to give it the movie ID. But we haven't really got the movie ID. So how do we get it? Yeah, and this is from the route that we have up here. As I told you about before, we have the ID up here in the route. So we can get that one from the router. So we have to import something up here. So we import curly brackets. It's a hook that's called use params from router-dom. So with this hook, we can grab that param that we have in the URL. So we do that before we destructure out the state and everything here from our useMovieFetch hook to make sure that we have the ID to send into that hook. So const, and then we destructure out the movie ID equals, and we call the use params. That's everything you have to do. And this one is named movie ID because we named it that in the app.js file. We called it movie ID. If we called it something else here, we have to destructure it with that name. But this will give us that ID that we have up in the route here in our application. So hopefully this will work. We try to console log out the movie. And this is actually the state, but I renamed it to movie. So that's why I can console log it out as movie. Save it. So we try it out, click a movie, and nothing shows up. And I think I know why. We go inside the useMovieFetch hook. We also need to actually invoke this function here. So we do that at the bottom of our useEffect hook. Fetch movie. Yeah, did I name it fetch data? We can rename it to fetch movie instead, like this. And make sure to invoke it at the bottom of the hook. Save it, go back to the application. And now you can see that we have the data here. So we have all the actors and we also have the directors that we filtered out here. So that's great. All the data that we need is here. I want to show you one more thing here, and that is if we were to remove this fetch movie function outside of the useEffect, like this. It tells us here that we need to specify the fetch movie, and that's okay because it's outside the useEffect now. So we do that. And then it gives us another warning here. And this is because this function will get recreated on each render. And this useEffect will think that it's a new function it gets on each render, and it will create an infinity loop. So that's no good. So if we want to have it placed outside of the useEffect, we need to wrap it in something that's called a use callback hook. So we can import that one up here. And then we wrap this one in the use callback hook like this. And then at the end of it, we need to have a dependency array. In this case, it's empty. And then it gives us another warning. And then it says that it needs to specify the movie ID because the movie ID is something that's outside of this one here. So we also need to specify this one. We specify the movie ID like this. And now it won't complain. And this one will not get recreated unless the movie ID changes. So this will stop the infinity loop. And we can see that it won't go into an infinity loop here. If you want to do it like this instead, you can do that. In this case, we don't need to call this function from anywhere outside of the useEffect. So I'm just going to revert it back and not use the use callback hook. So I'm going to have it inside of my useEffect instead, like we had it before. Save it, make sure that it works again, and it does. So that's how you use the use callback hook to stop infinity loops in React. But in this case, we won't need it, so it's better to have this function directly in the useEffect hook instead. All right, let's move on and create some nice components for our movie page. All right, we're going to create this nice little breadcrumb navigation up here on each individual movie. So go back inside of the code editor and inside the components folder, create a new folder that's called breadcrumb, capital B, capital C, and you create another file inside of that one that's called index.js. And you create a file that's called breadcrumb.styles.js. A bit repetitive now, but it's good because that means that we're probably learning something here. So inside the breadcrumb.styles file, we're going to scaffold out two style components. But first we import styled from style components. Then we export the const that's called wrapper. And it equals a style.div, double backticks. And then we export the const that's called content. And it equals a styled.div auto format it and save it. Go back inside of the index.js file in the breadcrumb folder. First, we import React from React. We're going to import the link from react-router-dom because we want to be able to link back to the home page. Then we have our styles, import, wrapper, and content from /breadcrumb.styles. And then we create our component, const breadcrumb equals. Then we're going to destructure out the prop that's called movie title. And we create an arrow function, and we can make an implicit return. So we have parentheses. We're going to have the wrapper. And then we have the content. Then we're going to use the link from the React router DOM. It's going to link to. And where do we think it's going to link? Probably guessed it. It's going to be / because we want to link to the home page. This is the first element in the breadcrumb menu. So we're going to have a regular span here. And it's going to say home. So that's the first one. Then after the link, we create another span. And we're going to have a pipe like this. I think it's option 7 on Mac. Yeah, option 7. Or you can have whatever you want inside of there, but I like to have that as a divider. And then we have the last span, and it's going to be the movie title. Do some auto formatting, and then we need to export default this one also. Export default breadcrumb. All right. So this is going to be a 2-level breadcrumb. We only have the home button to click on to go back to the home page, and then we show the movie title. Save the file and then go back to the movie.js file. Up here where we have the component imports, we import breadcrumb from /breadcrumb. All right. And then we can use it down here in our JSX. One thing we can do first is that we can return something here if we're loading. So if loading, return, we're going to return the spinner if we're loading something, which we are going to do initially. And if we have an error, we return a div that says something went wrong, or something else if you want that. So this will make sure that we show the loading spinner initially when we're loading all the data for the movie. And if we have an error, we won't show that JSX down here. I don't know why it says spinner here now. I'm going to delete that. All right. So instead of the movie here, I'm going to remove this one and I'm going to use my breadcrumb. And it has a prop that's called movie title. And for that one, I'm going to give it the movie.original_title. And I close the component like that. Save it and go back to the browser. And click a movie. And you can see that we have our breadcrumb here. It looks like crap, but we're going to style it in the next video, so don't worry. And it seems to be working here with the title and everything. And we can click the home button to get back to the home page. That's nice. So in the next video, we're going to give it some styling. All right, time to give this little breadcrumb some styles. And we do that inside of the breadcrumb.styles file. We have two components inside of that one. We have the wrapper and the content. So let's start by styling the wrapper. I'm going to display it as a flex. Align items is going to be center, and justify content is also going to be center. I set the width to 100%. The height is going to be 70 pixels. And the background is going to be from the variable that's called medgray. And the color is going to be also from a variable, but that's the white one. Save it, go back and see what we've got so far. You can see that we have it here, but it looks not good now, so we have to fix this also. And that's the one here, that's the content. So the content, we set that one also to flex, display flex. The width is going to be 100%. The max width on this one is going to be from the variable max width. And the padding is going to be 0 and 20 pixels. Then we have the span element inside our breadcrumb. So we're going to style that one also. So span, we set the font size. What do we have in the global style here in the root? Font, I think it's the font medium. So variable dash dash font med. And the color is going to be from the variable. It's going to be white. The padding dash right is going to be 10 pixels. And then we're also going to have a media query for this one. So at media, screen, and max dash width is going to be 768 pixels. And I'm just going to change the font size here. Font size. And I think, yeah, I forgot all of them now. Yeah, font small. That'll do, I think. So from the variable, font small. All right, save it and go back to our application. And there you have it. And it should change in font size. Yeah. So it's working and the link is working. Great. There's some padding there. Yeah, I have it there also. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can adjust that one if you want to do that. All right, so that's the styles for the breadcrumb. So let's move on and create our movie info component. We're going to create the movie info component. So if we look at an individual movie here, we can look at anyone. It's this component here. It's kind of a hero component. So I think this will be the largest individual component in this application. So we're going to do a little bit of JSX and also it's going to be a little bit of styling for this one. So we better get started with this. Move back to your code editor and inside the components folder, create a new folder that we call movie info, capital M, capital I. And then we create a new file, index.js, and then another file inside of that folder that's called movieinfo.styles.js. And we scaffold out the styles, so import styled from styled components. And for this one, we're actually also going to import some other stuff here because we need the image base URL and the backdrop size from the config. And I'm going to talk about that when we style this component. But we import them now. So import capital letters, image underscore base underscore URL, and also the backdrop underscore size. And we grab them from ../../config. All right. Then we scaffold out 3 components here. So export const wrapper equals style div double backticks. Export const content. Hopefully you're beginning to see my pattern on styling in this one. I usually have a wrapper and a content. So this one is also going to be a style div. And then we're going to have a third one that's going to be called export const text. And it's also going to equal a style.div, double backticks. Like so. Save the file, go back to the index.js file in the movie info folder. And we can start building this massive component. No, it's not really that massive. I think it's about 50 rows or something. All right, import React from React. Then we're going to have a component. So we're actually going to use the thumb component for this one. So import thumb from ../thumb. All right, so that's the component that we need. We also need something from the config. So import the image underscore base underscore URL and also the poster underscore size. from dot dot forward slash dot dot forward slash double dot dot forward slash config. Then we have an image, and it's going to be the fallback image as we always use. So import no image from dot dot forward slash again images no underscore image dot jpg. All right, and then we have our styles. So import curly brackets wrapper content and text from dot forward slash movie info dot styles. All right, so that's our imports. Then we're going to create the component itself. So we have a const movie info equals. I'm going to structure out a prop that's called movie. We're going to give it the movie data as a prop, an arrow function, and we can make an implicit return on this one. First, I actually going to export default it. So export default movie info like so. Then inside of here, we're first going to have a wrapper. And this one is actually going to take in a prop. And that's going to be the backdrop image. So we have a prop that's called backdrop. And from the movie, we have a property that's called backdrop underscore path. And we close the component. And inside the wrapper, we have our content like so. Then we're going to use our thumb component again. And this is actually great because you can see here how you can reuse components in React. And this is kind of the fundamentals of working with components. You can reuse them in your application. So you should always code with that in mind. If you want to reuse it somewhere, you should make the component flexible so you don't need to create similar components. It's better to use one component that you can modify with props instead. So we have our thumb. And on that one, if you remember, we have an image prop. So we're going to give it the image. And this one, just as before, I'm going to check if it has a movie poster path. I use a ternary operator for this one. I have a question mark. And also note I created curly brackets here because this is a JavaScript expression. And as I like to do it with template literals, I'm going to have double backticks. And I have a $sign. And then I'm going to grab the image base URL. Then I have another $sign and curly brackets. I'm going to grab the poster size. And then lastly, I'm going to have a new $sign and curly brackets. I'm going to grab the movie.poster underscore path. So that is if we have a poster path. Otherwise, we have a colon and we show the no image that we imported. So that's the image prop. Then we have the clickable prop. And in this case, we're going to give it false because we don't want this one to be clickable. We set an alt of movie thumb. And then we can close this component, do some auto formatting, save it, and we can actually go back to our movie.js component and import this one here, where we import the components, import movie info from /movie info, and then below here, below the breadcrumb, or we can use our movie info component like this. We give it the prop of movie, and it's going to be the complete movie state. If you want, you can specify it even more in detail if you don't want to give it the complete state. But I think for simplicity's sake, I give it the complete state here to work with. Save the file, go back to our browser, and you can see that we have our image here and we can't click it, and that's great. So, just see so it works with some other stuff here. Yeah, it does, so that's great. Move back inside of the index.js file in the movie info folder. So we created our thumb, and just below the thumb, we're going to have our text. So we use the text style component. And inside of that one, we're going to have an h1 tag. And we're going to grab the movie.title for that one. Then we have an h3 tag. And it's going to say plot or something else if you want that. Next, we have a p tag. And we're going to grab the movie.overview. And that's the short text about the movie. And inside of here, I'm actually going to create some regular classes with class name because I want to show that also. You could create style components also if you want to do that for these that I'm going to create now. But I'm going to create the regular div with a class name of rating-directors. I'm going to have both the rating and the directors in this one. And inside of this one, I'm going to nest another div. And inside that div, I'm going to nest an h3 tag that's going to say rating, like that. And then I have another div with a class name that's going to be score. And then I'm going to grab from the movie dot vote underscore average, and that will give us the score from the API. So that's the rating. Then below this wrapping div, I'm going to create another wrapping div. And this one going to have a class name of director. And inside of that one, I'm going to have another h3 tag. And it's going to say director. And I'm going to do a little trick here, because if there's more than one director, we want it to say directors. So I create curly brackets, and inside here, don't know why it did like that. Okay. And inside the curly brackets, I can have a JavaScript expression, and I can check if movie.directors.length, if that one is greater than 1, I'm going to add in an S like this. Otherwise, I just return an empty string. So if there's only one, it will say director. Otherwise, it will say directors. Then below that header, we create another pair of curly brackets, because now we have to loop through the directors and display them in our DOM. So from our movie, we have this property that's called directors. We're going to map over that one. And we have a director. And we can make an implicit return in this arrow function. So we have a p tag with a key. It's always important to include a key, as you know, otherwise React will complain. React uses the key internally to diff stuff so it knows what to change in the DOM. Okay, so the key is going to be from the director. We're going to grab something that's called credit_ID. And this will be unique. All right, and inside the p tag, we have another pair of curly brackets, and I'm going to grab the director.name. Auto format it. So that's the directors, and this should hopefully be it. So we can save it, go back to the application, and see what we got. We probably won't see anything because this text is white, I guess. And yeah, if we check here below, you can see that we have the plot. It is in white now, so we can't see it. The rating is 5.1. And we have a director here also, so we know that it's working. We just have to give it some styling to make it look nice. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next video. We have finished the logic for our movie info component, so it's time to style this one. Go back inside of the code editor, and inside the movieinfo.styles.js. We start off with a wrapper. And for this one, we set the background, and this one is going to be based on the prop that we send in that is called backdrop. So I'm going to create a turner operator here, because if we don't have a backdrop, then we're going to set the background to be just black. And if you remember, when we grab a prop in a style component, we can do that with a $ and curly brackets, because this is a template literal. So that's how you create a JavaScript expression. And then I'm going to destructure out from the props. So I have a parenthesis and curly brackets again. So I'm going to destructure out the backdrop like this. And then I create an inline arrow function. And then I'm going to create a turner operator here to check if the backdrop exists. So backdrop, then I have a question mark. And then I do another template literal inside of here. We have the URL, and I have a regular single quote. I don't actually know if we need this one, but I'm going to leave it in just to be sure. And then $, curly brackets. And I grab the image base URL. And then I have again $ and curly brackets. And I grab the backdrop size. And I have a third $ and curly brackets. And I'm going to grab the backdrop. That's the one that we send into this component. So that is if we have a backdrop. Otherwise, to the right of the colon, I'm going to show a black color. And then we have a semicolon to end this with, just after the last curly bracket. This can be a little bit nested here and hard to read, actually. See if it does something. If I, yeah, it auto formatted. It's on one row. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to remove this sidebar so you can see this is maybe easier to read. So I check if the backdrop is true, and then to the right of the question mark, I'm going to parse in the image base URL and the backdrop size. And then we have the backdrop that we send into this style component. If this exists, we're going to show that one as a background. Otherwise, we set the background to be black. All right. Then we're going to set the background dash size. It's going to be cover. And then we have the background dash position. That one is going to be center. And I'm going to set a little bit of padding on this one. So 40 pixels and 20 pixels. And I have an animation also because I want this one to fade up just as the other ones. Animate movie info camel casing and 1 second. And then I create the keyframes. So add keyframes like this. And then we go from, or if you want to use 0% instead, we set the opacity to 0 and then 2 or 100% if you use that instead. Opacity is going to be 1. Save it and see what we got. Okay, I must have some typos somewhere because we don't see the background. Yeah, and that's because I need to have this single quote here also at the end. Save it and go back. And there you have the backdrop. So that's sweet. I can actually try also to remove those and see if it works without them. Yeah, and it seems to be working. So we don't actually need to have those single quotes. All right, sweet. Okay, that's the wrapper. Move down. And then we're going to style the content itself. We set the display to flex. The max dash width is going to be from a variable max width. Then we set the margin to 0 and auto. The background. I'm going to set a transparent black on this one. So RGB or RGBA. I don't think you need an A actually. 0, 0, 0 and 0.7. And that will make it a little bit transparent. Then we have a border radius of 20 pixels. And we have a media query on this one also. So at media screen and max width is going to be 768 pixels on this one. And then I'm going to display it as a block and set the max height to none. And that's it for the content. Save it, go back to the application, and you can see that we have the content here, but we need to do some more styling here on the text to get it to look exactly as we want. So we have our text style component here. And for this one, we set the width to 100%. I set the padding to 20 pixels and 40 pixels. I set the color from the variables white. And the overflow is going to be hidden on this one. Then I'm going to grab a class that's called rating-director. So that's the one that I created inside of here. Rating-director. So you can grab them just as a regular class in the style component. So that's why you don't need to create a separate style component for each and every element if you don't want to do that. Some elements are really small and maybe it's not justified to have its own style component. So we're going to display it as a flex. And justify content is going to be flex-start. Then we have the score class. This one is also going to be displayed as a flex. Align-items is going to be center and justify content is going to be center. So these three will center stuff for us. And you could also create a separate class if you don't want to type them in all the time. The width is going to be 35 pixels. The height is also going to be 35 pixels. The background is going to be white, so FFF. And the color is going to be black. And you could also, of course, create variables for these ones if you want to do that and place them in the global style where we have the other CSS variables. The font dash weight is going to be 800. The border dash radius is going to be 25 pixels. Or you can actually set it to 50% if you want that instead, because this is a circle. And the margin is going to be 0. So that's the score. And then we have our director. So dot director. The margin is going to be 0, 0, 0 and 40 pixels on that one. And inside of that one, we have a P tag, and we set the margin to 0 on that. And below we have the last one, that's the H1 tag. And that one is going to have a media screen and max dash width 768 pixels. And we set the font dash size to variable dash dash font big. All right. Save it. Go back to the application. Yeah, so there's something here that doesn't look right, and I think I know what it is. Yeah, this one is called directors, and probably I misspelled this one. Yeah, rating directors. We should have an S there also on that class. Make sure that you add an S and save it. Go back to the application, and now it should look right. Yeah, and it does. We can see if it looks great on another movie also, and it does. Sweet. So that's the movie info component. In the next video, we're going to check out this little movie info bar that's below here. We can see the running time, the budget, and the revenue. Let's create the movie info bar, and that's the one here with the running time, budget, and revenue. We're going to start, as always, by creating the component first, and then we create the styles in the next video. So we start off in the components folder by creating a new folder that we call movie info bar, capital M, capital I, capital B. And inside of that folder, we're going to create a new file that's called index.js. And then we're going to create another file that's called boring stuff. No, I'm just kidding. Of course not. But it's getting a little bit repetitive here. It's going to be called movie info bar.styles.js, of course. And we start off by scaffolding out those style components. Import styled from styled components. And we export const, and we have our wrapper styled.div, double backticks. And then we're going to have our content, export const, content equals styled.div, and double backticks. Save the file and go back to the index.js file. We import React from React. And then we're going to use some helper functions that are provided for us. So if we take a look in the helpers.js file, you can see that I have one function for calculating the time and one for converting the money. So this one, for example, the convert money, JavaScript has something built in that we can use for converting into a currency. And this one, I set this one for converting it into US dollars. So you can change this one if you want to have another currency. And this one is going to give us the time in hours and minutes. So these are the ones that we're going to import in the component. So move back to the index.js file, and I mark it with helpers. Import, calc, time, camel casing, and convert money, also camel casing, from ... and ... again, help us. Right. Then we have our styles. So we import curly brackets and wrapper and content from ... movie info bar styles. All right. And then we can create our component. So we have our const of movie info bar equals. This one is going to get some props. So I destructure out the time, the budget, and the revenue. And I have an arrow function, and I make an implicit return. And I think I'm also going to export default it before we start creating our JSX. So export default movie info bar. All right. We start off with our wrapper. Then we have our content. And the first div we're going to have is a div. We have a class name of column on that one. So we have a p tag and running time colon. Then I have a curly bracket, and we invoke the function that's called calc time that we imported. And we give it the value of time, and we end it with a curly bracket. So that would give us the correct time. And actually the other two divs are going to look almost exactly the same. So I'm going to copy this one and paste them in 2 more times. The class name is going to be column also on these ones, but this one we can change it to budget. And instead of calc time, we're going to invoke convert money instead, and we're going to give it the budget. And the last one is going to be revenue. And we also invoke convert money and give it the revenue. All right, save it. And this is our movie info bar. We just need to make sure that we use it in the movie component. So move back to the movie.js, import it up here. Import movie info bar from / movie info bar. And then below, just below the movie info, we use that component, movie info bar. And we also have to give it some props. Time is going to equal movie.runtime. Budget is going to equal movie.budget. And the revenue is going to be the movie.revenue. And then we close the component like this. Do some auto formatting, and we get them on each row. So that's much nicer. We can see it here now. So we have these props here now. And this should be it for the movie info bar. If we save this one, go back to the browser, and nothing shows. And that's because we haven't styled it yet. I thought we should see something at least. But I guess it's because the text is white now, so that's why. So you can see down here that we have the running time, we have the budget, but the budget is actually 0, so that's no good. Or is it zeroed out on that particular movie? Yeah, it was. It didn't have any budget. All right. So in the next video, we're going to style it. All right, we're going to create the styles for the movie info bar. So make sure that you're inside the movie info bar.styles file. And we start, as always, with the wrapper. We display it as flex. Align the items to center. I'm going to set a min height on this one to 100 pixels. And the background is going to be from the variables. And I'm going to grab the dark gray. I set the padding to 0 and 20 pixels. Save it. Go back and see what we got so far. Yeah, we can see it down here. So go back to the code. Then we're going to style the content. We display it as a flex. I set the max width of a variable from the variable max width. I set the width to 100%, and the margin is going to be 0 and auto. Then we have that class that's called column. So dot column. That's the one, if you remember, that we have here, the class name column. And I'm also going to display that one as a flex. Flexbox is a really handy tool in CSS. Align items is going to be sender. And justify content is going to be sender. I set the background from our variable. I'm going to grab med gray. I set the border dash radius to 20 pixels. The margin is going to be 0, 20 pixels. And the flex is going to be set to 1. Then I'm going to style the first child. We have 3 of them, so I want to style the first child a little bit differently. I want to set the margin dash left to 0. And then I also want to style the last child, so colon last dash child. I set the margin dash right to 0. Right. And then we just have a media query left at the bottom here. At media screen and max dash width 768 pixels. I display it as a block below that pixel size. And the column, dot column, is going to have a margin of 20 pixels and 0. All right. This should be it. Save it. Go back to the application. See if it works. Yeah, there you have it. It works on mobile devices also, so that's super great. That's the movie info bar, and now we just have the grid with the actors left to do, and then we've finished the basic stuff with this application. All right, let's create the last component for our application, and that's going to be the actor. So inside the components folder, create a new folder that you name actor. And then you create a new file inside of that folder that we're going to call index.js. And we create another file that's called actor.styles.js. And inside the actor.styles.js, we import styled from style components. And then we export the const that we call wrapper equals styled.div double backticks. And then we're going to have another one, export const. It's going to be called image, capital I, of course, equals styled.img. We're going to style this image tag. Save it, go back to the index.js file, and we can create our actor component. So we import React from React. Then we have our styles, and we import the wrapper and the image from /actor styles. Then we create the component const actor equals parentheses, and then I'm going to destructure out inside of the curly brackets the name, the character, and the image URL. And we have an arrow function. We make an implicit return. We have the wrapper. Then we're going to display our image. We have the source of image URL, and alt is going to equal actor-thumb, and then we close it. And then we have an h3 tag that's going to display the name, so curly brackets and name, that's the prop name. And then we have a p tag, and we have curly brackets, and we're going to grab the character. That's going to be the name of the character. All right. Then we just need to export default actor, and our component is good to go. So go back to the movie.js file, import it up here, import actor from /actor. All right. And then move down to our JSX, and just below the movie info bar, we're going to show these actors, and we're going to show them inside of our grid. So we first display our grid. The header for this one is going to be actors. If you remember, we have this prop that's called header, where we can set a title of our grid. And inside the grid, we're going to map through all the actors. So we have curly brackets, and from the movie.actors, we're going to map through each actor. So we have an actor and an inline arrow function, parenthesis, we make an implicit return. Then we display an actor. It needs to have a key, as always, when we map through stuff in our JSX in React. So the key is going to be from the actor.credit_ID. That's the key. Then we have a prop that's called name. So we're going to give it the actor.name. I'm going to scroll up a little bit here. And then we have a prop that's called character. And for that one, we give it the actor.character, like so. And then we have the image URL. And it's going to equal, and this one is also going to be that Turner operator that we used before, because we want to display a fallback image if we don't have that one. So we check if we have an actor.profile_path. And then we have a question mark, and we're going to return our nice little URL. So I have double backticks, $, and I have curly brackets, and I grab the image base URL. And then directly after that, I have another $, curly brackets, and I grab my poster size. And then I have a third $, and curly brackets, and I'm going to grab actor.profile_path. Be very careful with the spelling here. It's very easy to get a typo when you do stuff like this. Then we have our colon, and if we don't have a profile path, we give it a no image. And then below here, we need to close that component also, do some auto formatting. So this should be it, my friend. We have hopefully finished the base of the application, and then I'm going to teach you some other stuff that's useful in React. So this should be it, I hope. Save it and go back to the browser. You can see that we have the actors here, but it doesn't look good because we haven't styled them yet. But at least it's working. And these are in white. There you can see the character they play in the movie. So we're going to style them in the next video, and then we have this nice actors grid. All right, let's give those actors some styling. So inside our code, in the actor.styles.js file, we have two style components. So let's start with a wrapper as usual. I'm going to set the color from our variables. We have white. I set the background, and also from our variables, we have the dark gray. I set the border dash radius to 20 pixels. The padding is going to be 5 pixels, and the text align is going to be center. Then I'm going to have an H3 tag nested here. I set the margin to 10 pixels, 0, 0, 0 on that one. And then we have the P tag. It's going to have a margin of 5 pixels and 0. All right, so that's everything for the wrapper. Then we have the image, just a few lines of code left. We display it as a block. The width is going to be 100%. The height is going to be 200 pixels. And object dash fit is going to be cover. And the border radius is going to be 15 pixels. And this should be it. Save it, go back to the application. And hopefully we have a nice grid. Yeah, almost. There's something wrong here with the background. Yeah, and that's because I have a typo. It should say border radius, like that, not radius. Save it, go back, and there you have it. Let's make sure that it works on all devices, and it does. Sweet, sweet, sweet. And that concludes the basic stuff for this application. In the next video, we're going to talk about prop types and how you can type check the props that you send in to your components. I'm going to talk about something that's called prop types. And prop types is something you can use on your components in React to type check the props that you send into your component. So you have this special property on your components you create that's called prop types. I'm on the official React page now, react.js.org. And just as they say here, React has some built-in type checking abilities. I'm going to show you how to convert this application into TypeScript later in a chapter. So if you don't use TypeScript, you should use prop types instead. That way you can at least type check your props that you send in. So they tell you here to run type checking on the props for a component. You can assign the special prop types property. And they give you an example here. So they import the prop types. That's from the library that we installed earlier. Prop types up here. Then they have the component name and then assign to this property that's called prop types. So this one has a lowercase letter to start with, and this one has an uppercase letter. So this one is the actual property on the component itself. and this one is the one that you import from the library that's called prop types. So it can be a little bit confusing, but we're going to practice this in our components. So hopefully you'll get a grasp of it quite quickly. You have this special property on your component that's called prop types, and that is an object, and there you can specify your props. And from the prop types that we import up here, you have different types you can check against. So this one will get a warning if the prop isn't a string that this component receives. And if we scroll down here, they show you everything you can do here. And we are actually just going to do those simple checks if it's a string, a number, or a Boolean. But you can also check against an object. For example, you can check all the properties in an object, and then you use something that's called shape, and then you specify your object shape inside of that one. So you can do some more advanced prop type validation here. Instead of just check that it's an object, you can check all the properties on the object by using the dot shape. So I highly suggest that you read this one on react.js.org if you want to know more about prop types. I think a lot of people now are starting to use TypeScript with React. And with TypeScript, we don't have to do this. We have it for free in TypeScript. So prop types is only good if you don't use TypeScript. And that's why I won't go into super detail about it either, because I think TypeScript is actually great to use in combination with React. But you should know at least that you can do some deeper prop type validation by using some of these syntaxes here. And you can also check an object with warnings on extra properties. Then you can do an exact check here if you want to do that. And you can also check if you send in an array that should have only numbers. You can check that also so that you make sure that the array doesn't contain strings, for example. And you can do the same with an object here. So there's some really useful stuff inside of here that you can learn if you want to get more advanced into prop types. But we are going to use the most simple use cases, and we're going to check for strings, numbers, and booleans, and also for functions, I think. So in the next video, we're going to learn about the most simple forms on how you can use prop types on your components. Okay, let's start doing some prop type validation. So we're going to do that with the prop types library that we installed in the beginning of this course. So let's begin at the top here with the actor in the components folder, and then we're going to move our way down and go through all of our components. So in the actor, make sure that you import prop types, capital P, capital T, from prop dash types. All right. And then just below the component at the bottom here, just above the export default, we have our actor component. So we're going to use the special property that's called prop types on that one. So actor.prop types. And this one is lowercase p, not capital P as it is up here. Be very careful here. It can be quite confusing actually. So prop types is going to equal, and we have an object. And then we can specify our different props that we have here. So we have the name prop, and the name prop, we know that this one is a string. So from the prop types that we import, that's capital P, prop types with capital P, prop types. We have something that's called string. So we're going to check against if it's a string. All right. Then we have the character. And from prop types with capital P, we're also going to check if that one is a string. And we have the third one, image URL, prop types dot string. All of these are going to be strings. So we save this one, go back to our application. And we can see here, we're going to need to be on an individual movie here. So we have this movie here, nothing shows up here. But if we go inside our, I'm just going to close this here. So if we go inside our movie.js component, we have our actor here, and we know that this name, for example, is a string. So if we change this one to a number, for example, 10, save it, go back to our application, you can see that we instantly get a warning here, failed prop type, invalid prop name of type number supplied to actor, expected string. So this is a very handy way when you develop your application to know that you send in the correct props to your components. And this is only available in development mode. It will not be in production. So it's kind of a tool when you develop this application to actually validate your props that you send in to your components.
we're going to change this back now and hopefully get an idea on how it works now. So that was our actor. Then we have our breadcrumb. So just as before, we import prop types, capital P, capital T from prop-types. And below the component, we have the component name breadcrumb dot prop types with a lowercase p. It's going to equal an object. And for this one, we have a prop that's called movie title. And from the prop types with a capital P, we're going to check if it's a string. All right. So that's the breadcrumb. Then we have the button. For that one, we have two props. So we import prop types, capital P, from prop-types. And below the component, we have the button dot prop types, lowercase p equals an object. We have our text prop. That one, we're going to check prop types, capital P, getting a little bit repetitive here. And we check if it's a string. And then we have a comma and we have our callback. And from the prop types, capital P, this one is going to be a function. So we have that one also on the prop types object. Func. So we can check if it's a function. Save it. Go back to our application and check. Yeah, it seems to be right. So that's our button. Then we have our grid. Import prop types, capital P, from prop-types. Below the component, grid.proptypes, lowercase p. Then we have two props for this one. Header, prop types dot string. We check if it's a string. And we actually don't need to check the children because that is a built-in prop, so we don't need to verify that one. So that's the grid. Then we have the header, and the header don't have any props. We can skip that one. We have the hero image, and this one have three of them. So we import prop types, capital P, from prop-types. Below the component, we type in hero image dot prop types, lowercase p. We have our object, and we have the image. We check against the prop types with capital P dot string. All of these are going to be strings also. We have the title, prop types dot string, and we have the text, prop types dot string. All right. Image, title, and text. Save the component. We move inside the movie info component. And for that one, we have one prop. Import prop types from prop-types. And below the component, movie info dot prop types equals an object, and we call it movie, I think. Yeah, movie. And this one is an object, so prop types dot object. And this is what I talked about before in the last video. If we go back here, you can see if we want, we can shape this object with dot shape. But I think there's too many properties in this object now to actually do this. I don't think it's worth it. So I just check if it's an object. But if you use dot shape, you can shape the complete object here and check every property on the object. All right, let's move on. We have the movie info bar, and for that one, we have three of them. So import prop types from prop-types. Below the component, movie info bar equals an object. And we have the time and prop types dot. This is going to be a number. So we have the number property to check against. That's the time. Then we have the budget, prop types dot number. It's also going to be a number. We have the revenue, prop types dot number. All three of them are numbers. Movie info bar. Yeah, of course I also have to have dot prop types like this. All right, just check the application. Everything seems to be working. Movie info is defined. Is it because I typed in? Yeah, this one is auto-generated when I typed in movie info below. Okay, just remove it, save it. Then we have the search bar. So import prop types from prop dash types. All right, below the component, we have the search bar dot prop types equal an object. So we have the callback function. So prop types dot func. We check if it's a function. Save it. The spinner, we not have any props for that one. We have the thumb, and we have three of them there. So import prop types from prop types. And below the component, we have thumb dot prop types lowercase p equals an object. And we have the image, I think, image, movie ID, and clickable. So the image, prop types, capital P, dot, string, that's the URL for the image. So it's a string. Then we have the movie ID, prop types, dot number. The ID is a number, and then clickable. Prop types, dot, and this is a Boolean. So we have something that's called bool. And this will check against a Boolean. All right. And that's actually our last component. I think we don't have anything in home and movie and not found. That's the last one. And I saved this for last actually because we built the whole application. So you should do this from start when you build a component. I didn't want to confuse you too much before we have learned more about React. So that's why I saved it to last. But you should have as a habit to always do this when you create a component that receives some props. So that's why I saved it for last. I think that sums it up about prop types. I'm not going to go all crazy about prop types. Hopefully you learned something here to get you started with prop types. And actually, I don't think in this application we don't need to do any deeper checks here, actually. Okay, in the next section, we're going to see how we can persist our state in the session storage.
We have almost finished our application. There are some things we can do to optimize it because now, yeah, it works. But for example, here, those movies here, we always reload those movies when we visit each site here. And also when we go back to the start page, we always fetch from the API. And that's what we're going to talk about here because in your browser, you have something that's called local storage and session storage. And we're going to utilize the session storage to store the data that we already retrieved. So if you open up the panel and you have something that's called application, and inside application, you have the storage. And there you can see the local storage and the session storage. And these here are all the movies that are stored from the application. So you can see it's the movie ID here. And here we have the data for the movie. So that's stored here. And we also have the home state. So this is from the other application that is finished, not ours. I just wanted to keep them here to show you how it's going to look when we store this stuff in the session storage. Local storage and session storage are quite similar. The big difference is that the local storage persists until you decide to remove it. The session storage only persists over a session. So every time you create a new session, the session storage will get wiped out. And you may wonder, wouldn't it be better to have the local storage for our application? Yeah, it would probably, but this page here is based on all the popular movies, so it changes a lot. So that means if we store it in the local storage and never remove it, we always get the same list of movies here, and that's no good. So that's why it's better to store it in the session storage. And also, each individual movie here also changes because we have a rating. Yeah, that one has 0 in rating. Okay. Let's select another one. That one has 7.6. So the rating will change depending on the voting. So there is stuff that can change in each movie also. So that's why I choose the session storage for both of them. But if you want, you can use the local storage instead. The code is going to be the same, except that you swap out session storage for local storage when we write the code. In the next video, we're going to learn how to persist the state in the session storage for the home page. Okay, we're going to learn how to persist the state in the session storage. And we're going to start by creating a little function that we can use to read from the session storage. So go back inside of the code editor, and in the file that's called helpers.js, that's the one I provided for you in the starter files, we're going to add in a little function at the bottom here in this file. So we export the const is persisted state like this, equals. Then we have a param that's called state name or name. You can name it whatever you want. Then I have an arrow function. And then we create a const that we call session state equals. And from the session storage, we have a method that's called getItem. And this is what I talked about before. If you want to use the local storage instead, you can just change this one to local storage and it will work. You just swap this one out to local storage. All right, so we invoke the method that's called getItem. We give it the state name, and this will return the state from the session storage if there's a state. Otherwise, it will return null. So it will get the item from the session storage with the name that we provide. Then we need to return something from this function that we create. So return, and I'm going to do a short circuit here. I check if session state. If we have something in this one here, then I have double ampersands, and it will return what's to the right of the ampersands. Otherwise, it will return this one, and this will be null if it couldn't find this one in the session storage. Let's say that we have something in the session state. It will run what's to the right of the double ampersand, so we can return that state. But we can just return it as it is, because you can only write to the session storage and to the local storage as a string. So we have to parse it back from a string into JSON. So that's also what we're going to do when we write to the session storage. We're going to first convert it to a string, but now we have to parse it back. And we can do that with JSON, capital letters, parse, and then we give it the session state like this. And this will parse it back to a JSON object, and we return it. Save the file, and this is it for this little function. So let's move inside of the use home fetch hook. So down below here are search and initial use effect hook. In this one, we can check if we have a session state before we retrieve anything from the API. So there are a couple of things we have to consider here, because we want to check the session storage on the initial render before we fetch anything from the API. If we have something in the session storage, we retrieve that one instead. And later we're going to create a hook that also writes to the session storage. And we're not going to write to the session storage if we're in a search. And that means that we also don't want to retrieve anything if we're in a search. So that's why we're going to create an if statement here. Just at the top in this use effect, if. And we have an exclamation mark and search term. So this means if not search term, then we're going to check the session storage. So we create a new const, call it session state equals. And then we also have to import our function that we created in the helpers file. So up here at the top, we can mark it with helpers, and import is persisted state from ... helpers. So that's our function that we're going to use here. To the right of the equal sign, we call that function is persisted state. And for a home page, we're going to create a state that is called home state. So we are hard coding in a string here for this one. You can make it a little bit more elegant if you want to do that. But I have a string here that I call home state. So that's the property that we're going to write to the session storage. And this one should actually be called state, like this. Then I'm going to nest in another if statement here. You could do this in multiple ways, but I think this one is more readable for this course. So that's why I have a nested if statement here also. So if session state, we check if we have something here. Then we're going to set the state and give it the session state. And it's also important that we return, because we don't want to do anything else here, because otherwise it will fetch it from the API also. And this is all that we need to retrieve something from the session state. We make sure that we don't check the session storage if we're in a search. But if we're not in a search, we check if we have something here. And if we have something in the session storage, we set the state with that one that we retrieved here. And then we return. We return early from this use effect. Otherwise, it will work as before here. We set the state first with the initial state to wipe it out, and then we fetch the movies from the API. All right, save it. Just make sure that everything works, and it does. So that's great. I'm also going to wipe out the old session storage here. This one is from React DevTools. So when you delete it, it will create a new one. All right. But we don't actually have something to retrieve yet. We also need to write something to the session storage. So if we go down here below our load more use effect, we're going to create another use effect. And I mark it with write to session storage. And then I have my use effect like this. This one is going to have a dependency array, and it's going to write to the session storage when the search term changes and also when the state changes. And yet again, I check if not search term, because if we're in a search, we don't want to write that one to the session storage. And this is, of course, optional also. If you want to save the search, you can do that also. But I don't think that's a great way of doing it, to have your last active search on the home page. So that's why. So if not in a search term, we can set on the session storage. And this is the same as before. If you want to store it in local storage, you change this one to local storage instead. Dot, we have a method that's called set item, just as we had the one that's called get item. In this case, we're going to set it. The first argument is going to be the name that we wanted to have in the session storage. And for this one, I choose the name homestay, just as the one as I grabbed up here. Really important to have the same name. It's a hard-coded string there. Then the second argument is going to be what we want to write to the state. And if you remember, I mentioned that we can only write a string to the session storage and to the local storage. So we have to stringify it, and we can do that with JSON, capital letters, .stringify. And we give it the state like this. And even if we didn't specify these ones first, you can see that it complains that it wants the search term and the state now. So this is the linting rules for hooks that is included in Create React App. So it's really great to have that one. All right. So that's how we write to the session storage. Save the file, go back to the browser, and you can already see when I save the file that it wrote the home state here for us. So we have the results here, and we can actually go back to the code and do some console logging. So up here in the search and initial, inside the if statement where we grab from the session storage, we can console log grabbing from session storage like this. And down below here, we can console log grabbing from API and save the file. And then if we go back to the console, you can see grabbing from session storage. And if we reload the page, it works. It grabs from the session storage all the time. And then go back to the application here, and we delete the home state in the session storage. Go back to the console, reload it. And now you can see that we grab from the API. So if we load some more movies here, a few of them, and then we reload the page, you can see that we have them here instantly. And that's because we saved it to the session storage. In the next video, we're going to persist the state in the session storage for each individual movie. Okay, one more thing to do with the session storage, and that is to store each individual movie in the session storage. That's what we're going to do. Back in the code editor, and we're going to be in the use movie fetch. And we only have one use effect in this one. So down at the bottom of that one, we run that fetch movie function. And before we do that, we're going to check if we have something in the session storage. Just above that one, just as before, we create a const that we call session state equals But of course, first we also have to import that function up here. So we mark it with helpers, and import is persisted state from ... helpers. Yeah, don't know why it did like this. Okay. To the right of the equal sign here, we're going to run is persisted state, and we're going to check for the movie ID, because each movie is going to be stored in the session state with its own ID. So that will give us null or the actual state. So if session state, if we have a session state, we're going to set the state and give it the session state. And then we're also going to set the loading to false for this one, because we're setting it to true up here when we start. That's why we have to set it to false also. Otherwise, it will keep on showing the spinner. Okay. And then we make an early return just as we did before. Otherwise, it will run this function here that fetches the movies from the API. All right. Auto format it and save it. But we're going to create the use effect also for writing to the session storage. Write to session storage. Then we create our use effect with an inline arrow function. It's going to have a dependency array, and it's going to change on the movie ID change and the state change. And these actually won't change because we're just grabbing data one time for each movie. But as I told you many times before, you should specify all the dependencies for each use effect. If there's something that won't work because you specify them here, you should handle it inside of the use effect, and that will make sure that you have less errors in your application. For this one, we don't need an if statement, so we can write to the session storage dot set item, and we're going to give it a name of the movie ID. Each movie is going to be stored in the session story with its own ID. That's how we separate them out. Then we have a comma, and we give it a state. But just as before, we have to run JSON stringify state, because we can only write a string to the session storage. All right. Save this one and go back to the application. And here you can see that it already saved the movie here. So here's the movie for that one. So if we check this one out, I think it's down below here. You can see that it will instantly grab that movie. And if we choose another one here, you can see that it writes to the session storage. And next time, it will instantly grab it, because this one here, you can see we have the loading spinner on these ones. But next time, we don't have to reload it. That's how you utilize the session storage to persist the state in your application. In the next section, I'm going to show you how to deploy this application. It's time to deploy the application. And for this course, I'm going to show you how to deploy it to Netlify. I think Netlify is a great and very easy way to deploy your React application. So that's why I'm not sponsored in any way by Netlify. I just like it, and I know that there's a lot of people that likes it also. So I think Netlify is a good choice for this. So the first thing you have to do is to create an account at Netlify. It's free, so make sure that you create an account, and that will show you kind of a dashboard here. I have a lot of sites here now, so yours will be empty if you don't have an account already. So make sure to create an account at Netlify. We will need it in the next video. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a production build of the application that we're going to deploy to Netlify. So back into the terminal and create React app is really simple to use. It has a built-in command that we can use to build our site. So make sure that you're inside your application folder, and then you run npm run build like this, and this will build the application for us. As it says here, it will create an optimized production build for us. So that's great. And it will place it in a folder that's called build. If we move inside our code editor again, we can see that we now have this folder that's called build. And this is our complete site in here. It's the production build of our site. We have to do one small thing here when we're deploying to Netlify if we want our routing to work correctly. Because, for example, I can show you here, this is the site here. If I go to this site and choose a movie, I grab this URL, that's the direct URL to the movie, and then I paste it in here. You can see that it works now. And that is because I created that little file that we're going to do now. Otherwise, it won't work. It will show an error here. And that's because we're using in with React Router. So that's why we have to have that little file. So back inside of the code editor and inside the build folder at the root, create a new file. The name is going to be _ redirects, like this. It's very important that you name it exactly like this, _ redirects. And then inside of that one, we're going to type in / index.html space and 200. And this will make sure that the routing will work in our application. So save the file. And now we're ready to deploy it on Netlify. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. I'm going to show you 2 ways in this video how to deploy your site to Netlify. And the first one is going to be really easy actually, because if you log into your account at Netlify and you're at this dashboard side, down below at the bottom, you will have this little zone here where you can drop your site. Want to deploy a new site without connecting to Git? Drag and drop your site folder here. And this is really sweet with Netlify actually. So if we grab our folder, that's the folder here where the complete application is, your working folder with the application. You have the folder inside of that one that's called build. So make sure that you grab the build folder that we built in the last video and just drag and drop it here. And you can see that Netlify starts to build your site. And I actually didn't have time to finish that sentence before it published my site. So you have the link here. It will create a randomly generated name. You can change that if you want to do that. So click this link. And you can see that your application is up and running. So that's how easy it is to deploy with Netlify. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to use something that's called the Netlify CLI. And that's what we're going to do next. So make sure to be inside of your terminal. So of course, you're going to be in the folder where your application is. We've already built our application. Otherwise, you have to build it. So npm run build and also add in that little file that I showed you in the last video for the routing to work in Netlify. Then we're going to install the Netlify CLI. I have already installed it, but I can show you again, of course. npm install netlify-cli-g. So that means that I install it globally. All right, that installed correctly. I'm going to clear my console. And then we can run Netlify deploy like this. And then you're faced with different questions here. So in this case, we're going to create and configure a new site. So make sure that you navigate down to that one. And it's Webenfalk's team in this case. You will probably also just have one team to choose from. So select that one. And then you can create a site name if you want to do that. I won't do that now, but you can also change it later. So I will use the default. I just pressed enter here. And then it asks for the publish directory down here. And if you remember, the publish directory is the build folder. So we type in ./build and press enter. And there you have it. But the site isn't actually live yet because we now have the opportunity to see if our site works. So you have a website draft URL. We can click that one. And here we can try our application to see that it works before we actually go live with it. All right, it seems to be working. Back to the terminal. And if we read here, we can add the -- prod flag if we want to go live with it. So we run Netlify deploy -- prod, and this will make it go live. Yeah, of course, I shouldn't have a space. It should be -- prod like this. And the publish directory is just as before, ./build. And you are provided with a couple of URLs here. So this is the unique deploy URL for this deploy. This isn't actually the live site. So this is the live site here. On this link, you can click that one and open it up. But I want to go inside of Netlify and check that it's actually here. You can see that it's here. So we can click this one and see if it works. And it works, and that's sweet. So that is actually also quite simple to do it in the terminal like this. So if you change something in your application, you can deploy it very easily without logging into Netlify from the browser. So you just type in netlify deploy, and if you know that it works, you can flag it with prod like this. And you can do this every time you change something on your site. All right, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to deploy with continuous deployment. That means when you change something and push it to GitHub, I'm going to use GitHub for that one, it's going to deploy it automatically. Okay, we're going to talk about continuous deployment on Netlify now. And that means that we can have, for example, in this case, I have a repository on GitHub that I'm going to use for this one. I published my site here to GitHub, and I'm going to use this one for continuous deployment. And that means that when I push something to this repository here, Netlify will automatically build my site and publish it. So that's really, really neat, actually. Just make sure that you add to your gitignore file to not upload the .env file. And also there's one other thing you have to do, and that is the file that we created in the build folder. You have to move that one inside of the public folder instead. You can see that I have the underscore redirects in the public folder, and this will make sure that this one is included when Netlify builds the site. So that's all you have to do, and push it to your repository. I'm using GitHub. You could use Bitbucket or some other service if you want to do that. So this is the complete site. Then I'm going to move inside of Netlify, and I'm at my dashboard. You have something that's called new site from Git. I'm choosing GitHub because that's what I'm using. So it authorized me here. So you have to log in. Then I can search for, my name is RMDB version 3. So I select that repository. And we're going to build from the master. That's correct. The command is going to be npm run build. And the published directory is the build folder. So that is correct. But we have one more thing to do because we have an environmental variable for our site. So we have to set that one up also. Show advanced. And here we can create a variable, new variable. So you can set the name here, and the name is going to be react_app_API_key, just as the one that we had in our application in the .env file. All right, then we need to give it some value, and here we can give it the API key to the movie database API. So I'm obviously not going to show that for you. So I'm going to paste that one in, and then I'm going to click deploy site. So make sure that you also paste in your key here and then click deploy site. And now we just wait for it. It's going to build a site, so it will take a little bit longer now, and hopefully this will work. And if we want to see the build log, we can also do that by clicking here, deploying your site, and it will show us the log. And there you have it. The site is live, it says here. So we're going to try that out. Go back to our dashboard, and here's the site. Click the link. We make sure that it works. And it does, and that is great. Just going to make sure also that these unique links work. If we paste that one in. Yeah, and it works. Sweet, sweet, sweet. This is how you publish on Netlify. And this also concludes the main part of this course. I hope you enjoyed it. There are some bonus parts. In the next part, I'm going to show you how to use class components instead of hooks. And then I'm going to show you how to convert this application into TypeScript. And lastly, I'm going to show you how to use the login and vote system for the movie database API. We're going to refactor our application into using class components instead of React hooks. I actually don't use class components anymore, and I think a lot of people don't do it. But the chances are that if you get a job as a React developer, you will work with a code base that at least has some class components. So there's a lot of applications out there that still has class components in it. And it's actually not even deprecated from the React library. So it's a legit way of creating components in React. So in some sense, it's a matter of preference. I don't think I ever will use them again, actually, because I love hooks and I always use functional components with hooks. But I want to show you how to do it with class components also. And there's 3 components that we have to refactor because we have 3 components with state in them. And that's the search bar, the home, and the movie. And we're going to start with the search bar. So make sure that you're inside the index.js file in the search bar folder. And there will be a lot of errors and warnings here when we remove stuff here now. But we'll fix that as we go along in this video. So first of all, this one is a functional component. We want it to be a class component. And then up here, instead of importing useState, useEffect, and useRef, we can import something that's called component, like this. And instead of the const here, we delete all of this here, and we create a class that we call search bar, just as before, the same name, and it extends component. So if we didn't import that one up here, we had to specify extend react.component. So this is a little shortcut you can do here. So we can remove these ones here. In a class component, you have one class property that's called state, and that's the only state holder you have. So that's one downside with classes. If you use useState and React hooks, you can have as many states as you want and separate them out. Here we only have one. So we have the class property that's called state. And now you can see that I'm not using the constructor like this, because we don't need to do that. Babel and Webpack will make sure that it will be transpiled down correctly. So we have this class property here that's called state, and it equals an object. We're going to have a property that's called value, and it's an empty string. So that's the value for our input field in the search bar. And then we're also going to have a class property that's called timeout, and we set that one to null. All right. The use effect, we can't use that one anymore, but we can reuse this logic here for the timer. So I'll remove these ones for now. And in a class component in React, you have something that's called lifecycle methods. And there's 3 of them that you should know. That's probably the most used ones. You have one that's called component did mount, and that's the one that's going to trigger initially in the component. And then you have another one that's called component did update, and that's the one that we're going to use now. And then you have the last one that's called component will unmount, and that one is triggered just before the component will unmount. And in that one, you can do some cleanups and stuff like that. But we're going to use the one that's called component did update. And you could do this in several ways. You don't actually have to use this lifecycle method to get this to work, but I want to use it here to show you how this lifecycle method works. So component did update like this. This one is going to give us the previous props and the previous state. So I make an underscore prev props. We're not going to use the props because we don't need to check against the previous props. So I mark it with an underscore just to tell that we won't use that one. And then we have the prev state. The prev state we will use. All right, so that's the component did update lifecycle method. And this one will trigger on each update on the component. So what do we want to do here now? The state here with the value is going to be the text that the user types in the input field, because this is a control component. So we keep it in the state. So we want to check if this .state.value, it's the value here. And as this is a class, we have to use this. So this .state.value. If that one isn't equal to the prev state.value, we want to do something. Otherwise, we will go into an infinity loop here, and that's no good. We check here if the value in the state isn't the same as the previous one. Then we know that we should do something. All right. And then we have one prop that's sent into this component, and we can destructure that one out. So const, it's called set search term equals this.props. So we destructure this one out from the props, because we send in this function here that's going to trigger when we do a search. Then we have our timeout. It's the one here. So copy this one, move it inside of there. Instead of const timer, we're going to set this one to this timeout that we created up here. So this dot timeout is going to equal this one here. And the first thing we also have to do is to clear this timer. So clear timeout, this dot timeout. And this is why I have this up here, so that we can access it here and clear it before we do something else. All right. And inside of this timeout here, we're going to grab our state value. And we can also destructure that one out. So const value equals this dot state. So we grab that property from our state. And instead of the state here, we give it the value like this. So every time we type something in, we're going to set the state, and that will update the component, and it will trigger this one. We clear the current timeout, and then we set a new one. And at every 500 milliseconds, we will trigger this search function, just as we did before. Then, in the class component, we have a render method. And inside the render method, we can return. So this logic here, we can grab this one, cut it out, and paste it inside the render method. Like this. And this one, we have to change this one to this.state value. And also when we set the state, this one isn't correct here. We should specify this.setState. And our state will look like this. We have an object like this. And we have a property that's called value. And the value here is going to be the same. And now you can see we don't have any errors in this component, and that's great. If you want, you can also destructure this value out up here, just before the return statement. Const value equals this.state, like this. And then we can use the value like this instead. Save the component, go back to our application, make sure that you're running the application. Then we can try if it works. And it's working. So it works exactly as before, we're just using a class instead now. So this is how you refactor the search bar to a class component instead. In the next video, we're going to refactor the home page. We refactor the search bar into a class component, and now we're going to refactor the home component. So make sure that you're inside the home.js file. And first we can remove this hook here, like this. And up here, we're going to import the component. And the home function, we create a class called home that extends component, like this. And the use home fetch, we're not going to use that one. We're going to copy that logic and use it inside of this component instead. So we have our state equals an object. And I'm going to have a property for this one that's called movies, that's going to hold the array with all the movies. And I'm going to give it the initial state. And this one, we have that one inside of our hook that's called use home fetch. So copy this one. And we can paste it in maybe here. Initial state. Initial state. Yeah, it shouldn't be a semicolon because this is an object. So we have a comma. And then we're going to have the search term because now we have everything in the same state. We can't separate them out. Then we have is loading more is going to be set to false initially. And we have loading. It's also going to be set to false. And we have the error false. So this is how the structure of a state is going to be. Yeah, I said this one is going to be an array, but it's going to be an object. And then we have the results. That's going to be an array that holds all the movies. So you can structure it however you want. This is the way I choose to structure it. The movies is the data that we get back from the API, and the other ones are the ones that we create ourselves. All right. Then we're going to make some room here and go back to the use home fetch hook. We have our fetch movies function here. So grab that function, everything, copy it, go back to the home.js file and paste it in here below the state. We have to remove const. Fetch movies, it's the same here. Here we have to do something else because we don't have this state as separate states now. So we remove these ones and this dot set state. We have our object. We set the error to false and we set loading to true like this. And here you can see we're only changing the properties that we want to change. React will merge the other ones automatically. And this is actually different from how the state works in a functional component with useState. With the useState hook, it won't merge the old state in. So you also have to make sure that you also provide that one if you want to keep it. But in this case, we're changing the error and the loading here, and the other ones will stay the same. So this is how it works in class components. All right, we have our movies. This one is going to be the same. The set state is going to be quite different now. First, I'm going to spread out the previous state. And then I'm going to have my movies property, because inside of this movies property that we created up here, we're going to place everything that's returned from the movie database API. And that's the stuff that we have here. I'm actually going to remove the sidebar also. So move this one up inside of the movies object here. So we spread out the previous movies, and now we have the results. And then we check if the page is greater than 1, just as before. But here we have to change this one, because from the previous state, we also have to go inside the movies property like this. So prev.movies.results. The movies.results is going to be the same here, because this is the new data that we grabbed from the API. So we merge that one in. And this one is also going to be the same. So this is our set state for the movies. And then below we have a comma, and then we set loading to false. And then inside of the catch, we don't have the set error. So this set state, we set the error to true, and we also set the loading to false, like this. We can remove this set loading here. So this is our fetch movies method. That's called a method now because we're in a class. Then we don't have the use effect here to trigger, so we're going to have a few functions here. We're going to have one that's called handle search equals. We have the search term. I create an arrow function for this one. And when we search for something, we're going to call this set state parentheses, and we have our state object, movies. We're going to set the movies to the initial state just to reset it, just as before. And then we also give the state the search term. And as this is ES6 syntax, we don't have to specify it like this. It's enough to just specify search term when the name is the same. Okay, so we set this state, and when we have set the search term and also reset the movies to the initial state, we want to do something when that state has updated. And in a React class on the set state, we have a callback function that we can use that will trigger when the new state is set. So we have a comma, and I create an inline arrow function here. And go on another row here. So then we want to fetch the movies, this dot fetch movies, and we give it the 1 because we're fetching from page 1, this dot state, and we give it the search term like that. And we can actually remove those curly brackets. I don't think we need them if we don't want to have them. It's up to you to decide. All right, so that's the search. Then we have the handle load more function. And it's also going to be an arrow function like this. And I'm going to type it in on another row. This dot fetch movies. And from this dot state dot movies, we have the page. And we're going to add 1 to the page because now we're grabbing the next page. And then we give it this dot state the search term. So we also provide the search term if we're in a search. All right. We can't actually auto format it yet because there's some arrows down below here. So we're going to create our render method. And then we're going to move this logic here inside of the render method like this. And then we have a few things to correct here. So first, I wanted to structure out some stuff from the state. So up here, as the first line in the render method, I have a const. I destructure out the search term, movies, loading, and error equals this.state. All right. So that will fix a few things. Here we have to change state because it's going to be from the movies.results. And I do that on all three of these movies. And instead of set search term on the search bar here for that prop, we're going to give it this.handle search. And here, instead of state, we're also going to map through the movies.results. Down below here, we change state to movies. On this callback here, it's going to be this.handle load more instead. And now we can auto format it. And hopefully we won't have any errors. But there's one more thing that we have to do. Because it won't fetch anything. Yeah, of course, I have to have a this.setState. And I haven't imported the API either. So go back to the use home fetch. Grab this one up here, copy, and go to the home. And we can paste it in here. And this will get rid of all the errors. But we're not actually fetching anything now. So if we save this one, go back to the application, you can see that it's empty here because we don't trigger anything. We need to have a lifecycle method to trigger when this component mount. And we have a lifecycle method built in for that. It's called component did mount. So we call that one, and inside we're simply going to invoke this.fetch movies, and we give it a 1 because we want to grab the first page. Auto format it and save it. Go back to the application, and now you can see we have our data and our movies here. And hopefully everything works as it should. Yeah, it works. So that's how you do it. And yet again, the app will look exactly the same here. We have the same functionality in the application itself, but we have refactored the homepage to use a class component instead. And as you can see, I think there's a lot more code here, and I think it's actually not that easy to separate out things. So that's why I prefer to use functional component and the use state hook and use effect instead. I don't really like this way of doing it anymore, especially with the state, because you have to nest a lot of stuff here as you only have one state. It's much easier when you can separate them out into different states, as you can with the use state hook. All right, just one more thing to do in this section, and that is to refactor the movie component to use a class component instead. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next video. We're almost finished with the refactoring into class components. We only have the movie page left to do. And we're going to do that right now. So go back inside of the code editor and inside the movie.js file. And for this one, we're actually going to do a little special thing here. And that's because we are using this hook here, use params. That's from React Router version 6. And there's actually no good way of grabbing the params in a class component with React Router. They have completely removed that functionality, and they do not support that for class components. That's why I'm going to do a little trick down below here at the bottom, just above where we export this one here. We're going to create a functional component for this one, const movie with params, like this. And then it's going to take in some props. We have an arrow function. I'm actually going to remove the sidebar again. And then we have our movie component that we have up here. So this one is going to spread all the props that this component receives. That way we can have more props if we want to do that. So we just pass them along to the movie component. Then I'm going to create a prop that's called params. And inside here, I invoke use params, like this. And then instead of exporting the movie itself, I'm going to export movie with params. So what I'm doing here is creating a wrapper component that will show the movie class component and also provide it with the params for us. So that's the best way I found of doing this, actually.
There may be some other solutions also, but I think this is actually kind of neat because you can do it on one row like this. Before you had something that's called with router that you can wrap your component with, but that's actually not provided in the React Router DOM or in the React Router library anymore. So that's why I had to do it like this. All right. So let's refactor this one. We're going to remove this hook here. And we can also grab from the use movie fetch hook, we can grab the API import. And I'm going to paste that in the movie up here somewhere, maybe there. And we're not going to use that hook anymore. And of course, we have to rename this one also. And up here, we're going to import component just as before. And we rename this one. We create a class movie extends component. And this one, we can remove that one also. And we can actually create a random method right now and move this logic inside of that one. Something like this. All right, and now we have some serious refactoring to do here. So first, we're going to create our state. So we have our class property state. It's an object movie. I'm going to set that one to an empty object to start with. Then we set loading to true and error to false, like this. All right. I did some auto formatting there also. Then from the use movie fetch hook, I'm going to copy this fetch movie function like this. And for this one, I'm not going to implement the session storage. So I'm just copying this one here. And I didn't do that in the home component either. All right, paste it in here in the movie component. We remove the const from fetch movie. Just as before, we have to refactor this one. So this one becomes this set state parenthesis, and we have our object error is going to be false, and loading is going to be true, like this. And then we can also destructure out our prop because we're sending that in with that special little component that I created down here. So now we have access to a prop that's called params. So I destructor that one out because we're going to need the movie ID like this equals this dot props dot params. And that will grab that one for us. All right, these ones are going to be the same. And this one also, set state, we have to change this one also, this dot set state. And the state is going to be movie. We have that property, it's an object. So we move these ones up inside of that object. And then we have a comma, and we set the loading property to false, like that. And that should be it for that one. We're going to remove the set loading. And here, change the set error to this dot set state, parenthesis, and the object error true, and loading to false. All right. And I think that's it for that function. And then we're going to have a lifecycle method also for this one. The component did mount. We're going to do something when the component mount. And the only thing we're going to do is to invoke this dot fetch movie. And then down below in the render function, we can destructure out from our state const. We have our movie. We have the loading. We have the error. Yeah, and that's it. And we grab them from this dot state. And hopefully it will work here now. Yeah, I think that's fine. Do some auto formatting. And let's see if it works. We save the file, go back to the application. Yeah, it's grabbing from the session storage now, I think. Yeah, it works.
So that's sweet. We have successfully refactored this application into something that what I think is a worse application because we're using classes now. I wouldn't do it like this. I would keep the functional components and the state with hooks and the use effect and the use state stuff that we use in the application. But it's up to you to decide that. But hopefully this gave you an idea on how class components works in React and to keep state in class components and the lifecycle methods. There's more lifecycle methods, but I won't go into them here because I'm not using them in this application. So that's why. All right, in the next bonus section, I'm going to talk about TypeScript and we're going to refactor our application into TypeScript. Welcome to this bonus section where we're going to refactor the application into using TypeScript. And TypeScript itself is quite a large topic, so we will only scratch the surface actually, but hopefully that's going to be enough to give you a basic understanding of how TypeScript works, and especially with React. So TypeScript is an extension of JavaScript, and it adds types to JavaScript. So that's great because JavaScript is actually quite a loose language where you can do whatever you want and it still works. So it can be a little bit messy if you're in a large application. So TypeScript will transpile down to JavaScript in the end. So that's why, as they say here, all valid JavaScript code is also TypeScript code. So you can decide how much you want to type stuff and how strict you want to be with TypeScript. And TypeScript is gaining a lot more ground. And it's almost a standard today when you create something from scratch. A lot of applications, of course, don't use TypeScript as they're old, and there's a lot of code base out there that hasn't been refactored, and you probably shouldn't do it for all of the applications either. But TypeScript is great if you have quite a large application and you want to keep track on types, and it's really great also because it's kind of like to have a second coder beside you that tells you what you do wrong meanwhile you code. So it's a great way to write a lot more errorless code. I think that's one of the great things with TypeScript because you have a really powerful IntelliSense with TypeScript and it will tell you if you do something wrong. All right, that was a really short introduction to TypeScript. In the next video, we're going to set up our project and start refactoring our application into using TypeScript. All right, let's start refactoring our application into using TypeScript. And I'm actually going to create a complete new application with Create React App. And that's because you can also create an application with TypeScript support, and it gives you some defaults and setup that we can use, so we don't have to do that ourselves. If we look here with Create React App, we can flag it with template and TypeScript, and that will create our application with TypeScript support. So that's what we're going to do first. So make sure that you're inside a folder where you can create a new project. And then go inside your terminal. I'm just going to show you this also. And then we type in npx create-react-app. And then we name our application react-rmdb-ts. And I think you also must have only lowercase letters in your naming. Then we flag it with template and TypeScript like this. And we press enter and we wait for it. All right, that's the bootstrapping of the application itself. So let's navigate inside of that folder, cd react-rmdb-ts, and you can see that we have some different files here. So that's great. We have one more thing that we need to do before we can start coding, and that is to install our dependencies in this TypeScript application also. So we have the style components, and we also have the React router. So let's start with the style components, npm I style-components. And as this is a TypeScript project, we also need the types for style components. And if a library won't provide you with types by default, you can usually find the types in @types/, and then you can type in the name of the library that you're installing. So in this case, it's going to be @types/style-components. And we press enter. All right, so that installed correctly. And then we also need to install the React router, the next version, the version 6, and the types for that one. So npm I. If you remember, we also install a library that's called history. That one is used for React router. So history, space, and then we have the react-router-dom @next. Just as before, we're grabbing the next version, and that is the version 6. Then we have a space, and we're going to grab the types for this one also. So @types/ react-router-dom, and we press enter.
All right, so that's the dependencies we need for this project. But there's one more thing we have to do, because now we have bootstrapped this new TypeScript application, but we want our old files inside of that one. So if we look here, here's the file for this project. I'm also showing the hidden files here. So we have the git and git ignore. So now inside of this src folder here, we have all the TypeScript files, but we want our files instead. And therefore, we can actually remove some of those files here. We don't need to set up tests. We don't need a service worker. We don't need a logo, index, CSS app. We can still keep the index actually, because that one is already set up for us. The other ones we can delete. So just keep the index, TSX, and the React app md.ts. And remove the other files like this. And then from our finished application, I'm using the hook version now, so not the class-based one, use the hook-based one. And we're going to grab from the src folder the API app components, config, global style, helpers, hooks, images, everything except the index.js file. Copy these ones and go inside the src folder of the newly bootstrapped TypeScript project and paste them in. And the application won't work now because we have to do a lot of stuff here to get it to work, but that's fine. There's one more thing we have to do also, and that is to copy your .env file. Like this. Or if it says that you can't copy it because it's hidden, you can create a new .env file and set up your environmental variable for the movie database API there again. So just copy that code from your other env file and create a new one and paste it in, because it's really important, because we need that one to be able to fetch data from the movie database API. We have copied all the files that we need for our TypeScript project, and that means that we can close the other project, and we're going to be in the new project from here on. In the next video, we're going to convert these base files here, the API app, config, global style, helpers, and stuff like that into TypeScript. And then we'll move on with the components and the home and the movie page. Okay, before we do anything, I have to correct the mistake I did in the last video, and that is the .env file. It shouldn't be in the src folder, it should be in the root folder. So move this one out to the root folder of your project and make sure that it's outside the src folder, otherwise it won't work. We can go inside of our terminal and try to start the project up. We will get an error, or probably a lot of them, as you can see, because we haven't actually converted anything into TypeScript yet, so that's why. So first, in the index.tsx file, we have to do some cleanup. We're going to remove the index.css. We're going to remove the service worker, like this, and save the file. And then we have something that's called react-app-n.ts. And this is the references for the types for React scripts. So we leave this alone. And also we have something here that you can see that's called tsconfig.json. And this is the config you can set up for TypeScript. So this is why I wanted the bootstrapped application with create React app, because they already set this one up for us. So they have a lot of great defaults here that's set up for us. And if there's something special you want to configure for TypeScript, you can do it in this file. So you can add them here. There's actually a lot you can do to set it up just as you like it. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use the defaults that Create React App provides for us. So we cleaned up the index.tsx file, and we're going to refactor all of the other files here in this video. So we can start with the api.js file. We have to rename it. So we're actually going to rename all of these files, because they should be called .ts, so that it indicates that it's a TypeScript file. So we rename them to .ts instead. All of these files is going to be .ts. The app is actually going to be .tsx, and that's because we're using JSX inside of that one. Otherwise, it won't work. So every time you use JSX, make sure that you have the file extension .tsx. Otherwise, TypeScript will fail. All right. So that's the renaming of the files. And then we can start in the api.ts file. And for this one, we're actually going to create some types, because we're returning data from the API, and we need to type that data. But first we can start to actually type the functions themselves. So here you can see that it complains now, parameter search term implicitly has an any type, and that's because we haven't set any type. This one, if we want to specify a type on this parameter, we use a colon, and then we specify it as a string. And you can see that it stops complaining now, and that's great. And the page, this one is actually going to be a number, so we specify it as a number. So that's how you specify parameters. You have a lot of types you can specify for them. And then if you want to specify the return type on the function, you can see that TypeScript actually won't complain now because the default setup don't force us to specify a return type. But I want to show you how we can do that. And in this case, it's a promise that we return because we're fetching from the API and we get back a promise. So if we want to type the return type to be a promise, we have a colon here. And then we specify it as a promise. But the promise needs something else. You can see here, represents the completion of an, blah, blah, blah. Generic type promise requires one type argument. And when you send in a type argument to a type like this, you do it inside of angle brackets. And we're going to specify that this is going to be the type of a new type that we're going to create that's called movies. We haven't created this one yet, so of course it complains. So we're going to do that in a second. We're only going to specify this const here also. The endpoint that we create here, we have a colon, and then I type it as a string. So that's how we type this function. And now we're going to create a type that's called movies. And the actual data that we get back from the API, it has a lot of properties. So I'm only going to type the properties that I'm actually using inside of the application. So we can mark it with types here. And then I'm going to export this type because I'm going to use it in another file. So that's great. You can also export the types. You don't have to specify them all over the place. You can specify them in one file and you can export them and import them wherever you need them. So export type movies like this. And from the API, we get the page. And that one is going to be a number. You could also create something that's called an interface. And then you do like this. They are almost the same today in the new versions of TypeScript. Before, there was some major differences. Actually, the recommendation is to use type in a React application. So we're going to do that. So export type movies and then equals and the object. Then we have the results. And the results is actually going to be all the movies. We're going to specify another type that's called a movie. That's a singular movie. And this one is going to be an array. So it's going to be an array of the movie type. So this is how you specify that array. So if you had an array, for example, with only numbers, you could specify it like this. But we are going to create another type object that's called movie. And we're going to do that in a second. But first, we're also going to type the total pages. It's going to be a number. And then we have the total results. That one is also going to be a number. Do some auto formatting. And you can see in the type object here that it uses semicolon and not comma as in a regular JavaScript object. I actually think it will work with comma also. But the formatting is set up so that it uses semicolon. But you can see that it seems to be working. But when I auto format it, it will return to the semicolons. Okay. All right. So we need to specify each specific movie here. So we create another type that I export. Export type movie equals an object. And here we have a few more of the different properties. So we have the backdrop underscore path. It's going to be a string. The ID is going to be a number. The original underscore title is going to be a string. The overview is going to be a string. It's easy to have a typo here, so be careful. Popularity is going to be a number. Poster underscore path is going to be a string. The title is going to be a string. The vote underscore average is going to be a number. And the vote underscore count is going to be a number. The budget is also going to be a number. And then we have the runtime. It's a number also. And the last one is the revenue. And it's also going to be a number. So that's the type object for a singular movie. And now you can see that it won't complain here because we're using that one and telling that the results is an array of the type movie. So each element in the array is going to be an object of this type. So that's how we specified it now. All right. And you can see that it won't complain here now because we're using this type here, the movies. So that's fine. Then we move on to the fetch movie, the singular fetch for each movie. We have this param here. So we have to use parentheses when we type this. The movie ID is going to be a number. And the return type is going to be a promise again. And this time it's the movie. We already created this one because it's a single movie. So we have this object here. So that's great. And we can also specify the endpoint. You can see that it won't complain because the default setup won't force us to specify everything. But it's always a great idea to specify what type you return in the const. All right. So that's the fetch movie. And you can see here also bonus material for login. We're not going to type this once. I'm going to stop here for the basic fetch functions here. So fetch credits. We have the movie ID. That one is going to be a number like so. And it will also return a promise. And we create a type that's called credits. But before we do that, we can also specify the credits endpoint as a string. All right, then we go up here again, just below the type movies. We're going to export the type that's called credits. It's always a great idea to export the types because you never know when you need them. That way you make sure that you can access them from anywhere in your application. The ID is going to be a number. The cast, we're actually going to create a new cast object for that one. So it's going to be an array with an object that we specify as a cast. And we're going to do that in a second. We have the crew, and it's also going to be a new type object. So an array of crew, like this. So up here, we export the type cast equals. We have the character. It's going to be a string. The credit underscore ID is going to be a string. The name is going to be a string. And the profile underscore path is also going to be a string. If you want to type this in one row instead of typing them out when all of them are going to be a string, you can do it like this. You have a square bracket and then you have the property. The property is going to be a string. And then the type is going to be a string like this. And this will also work. But I think it's better to be more explicit and type all of them like this. Then we have the crew. So export type crew equals an object. Job is going to be a string. Name is also going to be a string. And the credit underscore ID is going to be a number. Auto format it and save it. And hopefully this will work. You can see that it will give us some errors here now because I won't type this one here. Or is it only, yeah, I can actually just type this one so we don't have an error. The request token is going to be a string. The username is also going to be a string. And the password is also going to be a string, some auto formatting, and we have them on their own row. So that will get rid of the errors. But we won't focus on these below the bonus material. Only these ones here. So that's what we're doing. All right, save the file. So that's the api.ts. Then we have our app.tsx file. And you can see here now that it complains because we don't have the types for this one. And that's because we're using the next version. So in this case, I'm just going to ignore it because I know it will work. So when you ignore something with TypeScript, you can do that by comment and then at ts-ignore. And that will get rid of that error. So we have to do this for now before it is officially released. Then they will provide the types for it, and then we don't have to do it like this. And the only thing we have to do more is to specify our React component. So this is a functional component. And if we do a colon and react.fc, we have that built into React. So we have that type for a functional component. So this is everything we have to do to specify this as a React functional component. All right, save the file. Then we have the config.ts file.